In this video, I will be going over how I create a campaign for Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition. I will go over how I get an idea for a game, my Session 0 that I hold for my players and what I want to achieve from Session 0, how I make a layout for the game, basic world building, and the tools I use. This will also include how I create my starting game to get the campaign started, and finally, how I update the chronicle as it goes on. Part 1. How I get an idea for a game. This is one of the easiest parts of creating a chronicle. Inspiration can come from any medium such as a movie, book, comic, podcast, YouTube video, or even hearing someone talk about a game that someone else had run. As a storyteller, my mind is always in the game and wondering, how can I do something like that in my game? A mystery, a cool plot twist, or even a character that I find intriguing might draw inspiration for a chronicle idea. Since I'm currently running my group in a Werewolf the Apocalypse 5th edition campaign, I will use that as my reference to creating a campaign, but the same process can be used for creating a campaign in any system with some tweaks depending on what system you're using. Since we know the game system will be Werewolf, the next step is a generalized campaign idea. I chose learning the 5th edition of Werewolf as the main objective, and a couple thoughts I had to incorporate into the campaign, so it wouldn't just center around new mechanics. The first was after watching Madame Web. I thought, what if I had a young blind girl that could see the future and the player's pack stumbles across her? But the kicker to it is that others know of her too. Even if the players get to this resource first, the others that have discovered her could come for her or even try and kill her to take the edge from the player's pack. In the meantime, she can give clues to things that she sees to give the players pack quests and objectives to discover. The other idea I had is something that I got from reading comics. Major betrayal from someone looked at as a friend or mentor. I do not want to give up any details as my players follow my videos, and I do not want to spoil anything for them. The comic basically sets up a mentor or ally to the hero for some time, and turns out to be the bad guy at the end of the series. I decided I would make the players pack enemies with a sept of Cult of Fenris members, make them heroes for besting them and getting a strong win. But because of the win, an ally turns on them and joins the Cult of Fenris. This ally will target them and have them do things that put them in more danger than they should be intentionally. There is a little more to this, but I think you get the basic idea without me really spoiling anything. Now that I have a main idea to start my campaign, and a couple ideas to keep stories flowing throughout the chronicle, there isn't much more that I can do without my players at this point. This is when I set up one of our game sessions to be Game 0 for my new Werewolf Chronicle. Disclaimer, I have a stable group of people that I have played with for years. By years, I mean more than 25 plus years. But I have a single person that has only been with my group for less than a year. I know what is okay and what isn't with them. If I overstep or do something that makes one of them feel like I have gone too far, they know they can stop me and say something. We do not need to talk about this particular topic at our table, but I certainly would if playing with new people. My main objectives for our Session 0 are the following. Where do they want the campaign set at? What themes do they want to explore? Then finally, creating their characters. So my first point is to ask them where they want the campaign to be set. I offer some suggestions and let them choose or pick some place that I have not even thought about using. With my base chronicle idea, the setting doesn't matter, so there are no limitations on where they choose. If my idea for a chronicle is centered around a particular place, then I just inform them where it will be set at and give them a little information about the area to help them get some ideas for their characters. A good storyteller tip: if you have a setting already in mind to use and would like to use a certain profession for one of the players, or a touchstone even, when giving information on the setting, input the profession more than once into this information and it will stick in their mind. You will find a player choosing this profession for themselves or one of their allies. If they do not, at that point you could ask if someone would mind including it, giving them the impression that it is their idea to add this. Will make them feel that a part of the story was especially created for them, even though it had nothing to do with them at all at the start. What theme do they want to explore? I again offer themes for the game straight from the main book, page 200 to 202. Of course, I offer a couple of other theme ideas I thought of or allow them to offer, something that they think up on their own. They chose the theme, The Path to Hell, which really goes well with my story ideas to start off my chronicle. The first sentence to that theme reads, "In a world where such concepts as exploitation and atrocity have living spiritual equivalents, concepts of good and evil are less useful than judging actions and their outcomes." That is perfect for me as well, so I am more excited than they are at this point. So, at this point, the players have picked Seattle, Washington area, with the theme, The Path to Hell. Now that we all have agreed to this, the players create their characters. My role during this portion is to offer help and suggestions to help them create the character they have envisioned. Their characters are the most important part of chronicle creation. So much of what they create actually builds upon the chronicle ideas I have. Touchstones. Werewolf makes better use of touchstones mechanically than vampire or hunter. I can rant about this in another video, but it is important for the players to realize that willpower loss is incredibly fast in Werewolf, and regaining is a lot easier utilizing touchstones. Touchstones become an important part of the story as well, so I encourage them to max them out at 3, but will not accept less than 2 without an in-story reason. Advantages. Merits and flaws, as well as the backgrounds that each character takes, make a huge difference within the campaign and must be taken into consideration. The top ones to look at are the non-player characters that will be included, such as allies and contacts. Flaws are the second section that I look at on a character, as they can add more non-player characters to the campaign. I take note about everything else taken. All backgrounds can have an influence on the campaign. If every character would take resources above 3, for example, then money may be an important issue with the players. How they earn those resources, maintain those resources, and utilize these resources will have to be included in the game. Even if resources have no effect on the campaign itself, the players have made it important by so many taking it. Chronicle tenets. I have rules to these that I insist on being followed. If you choose something that does not have a clear meaning, explain in detail your idea of the meaning or choose something else. Having multiple people means that there can be multiple meanings of the same phrase. These are not I got ya topics that the storyteller uses to punish your character. They are rules that your character chooses to follow. The best ones are usually start with I will always or I will never. Anything else can always lead to debate, and that is not fun for players or the storyteller. Clarify with everyone before accepting so no one, especially you, are confused to its meaning. Now comes detailed work solely on my end, the world building and starting story for my chronicle. I have the main characters for the story, so now I must think about how to start the chronicle. Since it is a werewolf game, I thought the easiest way to start the game would be to gather everyone together and have them do a rite of passage. This follows my main idea of teaching the new system, as well as setting up the rest of the chronicle. I decided that since the players didn't choose Cairn as a background, I am guessing, because it's a new system, I am going to create a sept that sends their guru out in search of new guru. Now comes the work I need to put in to get this chronicle started. The tool I use for my world building is OneNote. This is not going to be a OneNote tutorial, but I will give basic steps that will give you an easy understanding about what I am doing. First, I make a section and name it Players Pack. This is where I create pages under that section tab with one character under each page. Each of these pages has a picture of the character and details about the character. I then create subpages under each page that are made for touchstones, mentors, enemies, allies, or anything that stands out from the character that I will information added to regularly. If you choose to try OneNote or are already familiar with it, this is all very easy to do and makes things super easy later. Then I create the sept or Cairn tab. I create pages under the tab for each pack in the sept. I have 3 packs in this sept, so there are 3 pages. I then make sub-pages for all of the pack members of that pack. I will write up brief descriptions, pictures, and any other information that I might need. I do not put stats, as these are not going to be fighting my player characters, so stats are not important at this point. What is important is what their position is: pack leader, sept leader, elder, their tribe, auspice, and other pertinent information. Back on the pack page, I write up a general idea of what that pack does within the sept. It usually comes together when I put the pack together. Now that I have the sept built, I create a cairn and decide where it is located. Under the sept tab, I build this with a picture of the area. I write up a brief note about the importance of the cairn to the area and any important spirits in the area. I move on to the local area where the cairn is located and grab maps of the town that is closest to it. I chose a small town about 30 minutes from Seattle and write up a little bit of info that I dig up on the internet and added anything that isn't there that I think I will need or could need later. I go through the characters' advantages and see if there are any with mentor that I can assign from the characters I created from their future sept. Then I create a page for the closest local town, and I see if there is anything I can add into the town to make it fit with their characters, such as allies, contacts, as well as flaws such as stalker, etc. Characters such as allies, contacts, as well as touchstones get a paragraph or less written up if the player has not done so. This is what I call building an NPC, giving them a short background with little details. As I know my players, most of them prefer me to build them, but I have a couple that like to build them themselves. Once built, I put a general idea in stats, but these are just for me to see. That way, if I want them or need them to have a special knowledge or skill later, I can add it. Once the players know a skill the non-player character has, they will not forget it. So, it is better to do it this way. This is the world-building phase of my campaign. I know who will be important in the story because of the characters' advantages and touchstones, as well as NPC I have created for the story. I do not normally go crazy on this portion until the game starts, because sometimes things change at the beginning of a game, and things I think will happen don't. I let the players do what they like, or at least the illusion they are doing what they want, and note things that need to be tracked. While I am world building, I will stumble across other ideas that I think would be neat to include, maybe due to how one of the players will play out their character, or something that I notice as a character quirk. I make a section in OneNote, or under the characters section, to note this idea, to add into the game at a later point. It is okay to make lots of sections in your OneNote and condense them later, but I highly recommend you do keep your OneNote notebook condensed, so it's easy to know where to look for information when you need to. This section of the campaign building is the longest because it involves research, getting maps and pictures, stating out important NPC. I also use OneNote to keep ideas for working in short stories that build towards my goals, or the player's goals, for their characters that I think of while I am creating everything. This is also the section that spirits are built on, and I have my own section for them. There are spirits that are encountered, and spirits that can be regulars. An encountered spirit can be something random I put into a game for the characters to just come across, or they can be enemies, or obstacles that have to be dealt with physically or socially. Regular spirits are spirits that are regularly in a location, and the player, characters know they can usually find them in these locations. Like a raccoon spirit that resides in a certain tree within the umbra within their bawn. The regularly encountered ones, although not allies, but they could eventually be, should be written up and stated with notes on their interactions with the player characters. Having personalities, or lack of personality, makes a huge difference in a chronicle. For every spirit that you have that speaks to the characters like another human being, have one act completely alien and behave strangely. This keeps the players themselves from just expecting spirits to be the same. I have one spirit that looks like a galaxy, and it flashes once for yes and twice for no, but never speaks. Another spirit looks like a blob, and it changes its forms to get its message across, but again, it never says a word. An anger spirit that is an angry face that just floats, and when its mouth opens, a loud semi-horn honks instead of words coming out. The players figuring out how to communicate is part of the fun. Final note for world building is to not be afraid to change something if you think it will make the game better. If a certain spirit you want to use has an ability that doesn't serve the purpose you need, make it serve the purpose. Instead of having the spirit do aggravated physical damage, have it do aggravated willpower damage. If you do not need it to do damage at all, change its power to a grapple, using plants and such that are in the area. The more creative you are, the more the players will enjoy the strangeness of the Umbra. If you create something for the game, or have an idea written down to use at some point in the future, it does not have to be used. It is nice to have something on the back burner in case you have a dry spell on thinking where to go next. If the players are not biting hooks that you have thrown out to keep your story moving, just have an NPC give them what they need. Most of the time the players will bite off more than they can chew. And so this is not a problem. If I have 3 side stories for each player going and throw out another, one of them would jump on it guaranteed. Normally, I will slow things down for a game or two in order to give the players time to complete certain things, or at least catch up so they do not get overwhelmed with tasks. Now it is time to build the starting game. We have my starting ideas, what I created in the world building, and what the players came up with from session 0. Important things to take from their created characters are advantages like backgrounds and flaws, touchstones, and then chronicle tenets. From what you are told and how they build their character, you should have a good idea about who their character is and how they will fit into the campaign. At this point, I use Microsoft Word and start typing up my first game using OneNote to reference. What is included in each game session? Every character gets their advantages, touchstones, and chronicle tenets put into the story. If a merit or flaw is taken, it will be in the game immediately. I cannot stress the importance of putting everything that the character has on their sheet be included in the story. Your players' characters are the star of the story, not the storyteller's story. I work around the characters and change things if needed in my ideas, not the players, if changes need to be made. All non-player characters should be at least a phone call each per story, if not included in the story at some point. Always, at the very least, a mention from the storyteller, like, you got a call from your touchstone and had a casual conversation. What do the two of you talk about regularly? This gives them input and can give you ideas how they relate to one another casually. Here's what I did for my first game setup. A member of the SEP that I had created sent a tracker to gather up the characters after their first change. Once all together, they were sent on a rite of passage. I made sure to include information and objectives that would teach them the new 5th edition game mechanics for Werewolf the Apocalypse. I introduced the characters to their non-player characters that they had created for their character, as well as the ones that I wanted to add to the story. Although this game ended up running several sessions, the end result was perfect. Enemies were introduced, as were some mysteries that could all be used in future games. Everything that the players had created had been put into play, and everything that I wanted to get started for the Chronicle had been included as well. The 5th edition rules were gone over, the blind girl that had visions of the future was introduced, and an attack, setting up that an unknown enemy was out for them. The last thing to mention is keeping notes. I have a section called Ideas for Future Games. Here is an example of an in-game event that was added to my story chronicle in OneNote. The characters to appease a spirit must solve a person's troubles within that person's dreams. Each player character is given a person's dream to solve. One of them is a woman who is dressed like a samurai in a Japanese forest. She draws her sword when she sees the character and begins to fight. She has been forced into prostitution and is abused regularly. She is beat by her handler and forced to sleep with men, and has little hope for ever being free again. Her reality is that she has no control of anything in her real life, so, in her dream, she has all the control. The player quickly caught on to what was going on and convinced her that it was just a dream, and she needed to be strong and stand up for herself, telling her that she was beautiful and only as weak as she let herself be. Weeks later, the pack is working on a side quest, and that character sees a prostitute walking by that he recognizes. He stops her, and she runs into his arms, calling him her Shogun. This ended up being the Around's deed name in the pack. He also talked to the pack, and they rescued her from the evil handler, so she is now finally free. The player also asked to buy her as an ally. Now Mai Xing, the girl from the dream, is a part of the chronicle. The prostitute walking by the character was only included to show the players that the dreamers that they aided earlier were real people having real issues, not just puzzles to be solved to appease a spirit. The pack rescuing her and the relationship that had started since then was completely unexpected. When something changes in the game, the work needs to be changed immediately after your game, so it is not forgotten. Nothing is more frustrating than forgetting to write something down, and then at the start of the following game, someone reminds you of the detail that had been missed. I update each character if they change something, as well as non-player characters after each game, or at least note it, so I remember to do it ASAP. During the game, if something happens that can change events in your game, you can note it as well, but the important thing is to keep everything updated. In this example, Steward wants to learn a punishment rite, learn more about the spirit in his talisman, and spend more time with his touchstone. I make sure to include all of these objectives into the next session or two. As a side note, the player mentioned that he had a Dodge Caravan, so I made a note of it so I would not forget what he drives. Touchstones, allies, and other non-player characters that are included regularly in games should have notes taken on reactions and encounters in each game. This builds a bond between the character and the person they are supposed to have a bond with. If ignored, or the bond between the character and their allies or touchstones is tested, it should not go unnoticed. Note it and have something come out of it. An ally is called for a favor, and they refuse to come because they feel used. Or touchstone is angry with them and refuse to speak to them again until the situation is resolved. Keeping a note on that NPC makes it clear immediately if things are good or not. This may seem tedious at first, but keeping all these notes when running your chronicle helps in several ways. Firstly, when you are creating a game within your story, you can refer to people and places and their details quickly. Secondly, when you're running the game, you can refer to notes to answer questions or check something for players. I have seen it happen when the players forget that a certain ally has a Corvette, and they think she has a van and call her for a ride. Yes, I even keep notes on what they drive. In my free time, I build PowerPoints for my games, so players become more interested in the stories being told. Sometimes pictures are easier to remember than names, and PowerPoints are an easier way of getting subtle info across without giving handouts that players must read. I usually do a recap PowerPoint to go over everything that happened in the last game and set up the beginning of the current game. Sometimes I have info PowerPoints in the form of TV news or commercials to give info out as well, instead of handouts to read that can make it feel like an info dump. Any detailed information should be delivered in the same way to keep from overwhelming players during your chronicle. Having a commercial, news broadcast, or radio station give information about a topic. When brought up within the game, the players are already going to have some familiarity on the subject. They will not be overwhelmed when more information is added to what they already know. I hope you enjoyed this video and maybe learned something new or at least picked up on something you would like to include in your own games.